But Jesus says, be like me. And so part of becoming a Christian and part of the process of growing, God does expect us to bear fruit. And there are ways that we can work on that, and that is rewriting our playbook to bring it closer and closer into conformity with Jesus.
Greetings and welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Excellent to have you along. Keyna Martinez and I are having a conversation. I'm so looking forward to getting back into that conversation for part 2 as we talk about rewriting the playbook. And I would love to go into that point, Keyna. What does that rewriting process look like? What activity should we take responsibility for in that rewriting process? So we've already explained that the playbook is an automatic thing. It develops automatically, it runs automatically, it prompts us to behave and respond or view situations automatically. It takes absolutely none of our conscious control and effort. Which I just want to I want to acknowledge how difficult it is because of all of what you just said. Right. We don't notice we're running the play. Right. That's what you're saying. We don't notice when we're running the play, but we're running the play. Right, because it feels right. And it feels good. And we need to realize we're running a play. So this Correct. That's the conundrum. So the wonderful thing is that God created our minds with also the deliberate or intentional path for decision making. So we are not just slaves to how we feel. Feelings are important. Sensations are clues. If I feel hungry, that's a clue that my body needs nourishment. So God gave us feelings and emotions for a purpose, and they are designed to be tools for our aid. But we cannot and should not be a slave to them. If we were, we are no better than animals. And can I ask for a little clarification? So this commentary right here on feelings are a clue that we're running a play? Is that how I should think through it? Or at least that our playbook is influencing us or making a suggestion about what we should do. Now, whether we follow through on that suggestion or not gets over to this other side of our brain that God has given us the ability to make deliberate, intentional choices. And that does not appear to be something He's given animals the power to. So animals mostly operate off of the playbook. That's all they know. That is their instinct. We have the ability to make conscious intentional decisions. And so one of the things that we can do is we can use our conscious decision-making to, first of all, identify that we're, as you say, running a play, that our instinct or our natural inclination is prompting us toward a certain action or behavior, and we have a choice whether to just go with that instinct and follow through on whatever it's telling us, whether that's, saying angry words at someone, or eating the whole bag of donuts, or, whatever unhealthy or un-Christ-like behavior it might be. Or we can choose to say, wait a minute, where is this impulse coming from? What am I really feeling? So an example of that would be someone who maybe struggles with overeating. We would say, okay, you want to eat. You get this urge to go and eat. Stop and think about it. What am I really feeling? Am I really hungry? Or am I lonely? Am I afraid? Am I feeling tired? Because the playbook will say food fixes all these things, because when we eat, we do get a little bit of pleasurable hormones in our brain, and it can solve, in terms of the playbook's needs, several different problems. But the only healthy reason to eat would be that we need nourishment. And so being able to stop and evaluate and say, wait a minute, before I follow through on this, where is it coming from? What is the feeling that I'm having? And what's driving that feeling? And is the action I'm about to take really the best way to manage this particular need that my brain is saying that I have? Once we've evaluated that and decided whether the impulse is healthy, unhealthy, good, whatever, then we need to start comparing it to Scripture. We need an external standard. We need something outside of ourselves
to check our playbook against, to verify that the plays are right, that what my instinct tells me to do is in fact going to honor God, bring forth fruit in my life, serve His kingdom, not shame the name of Christ, all of those things that God asks us to be aware of. So once we've evaluated what am I feeling, where is it coming from, then we compare what do I feel like doing with what does God want me to do? What are His instructions? What is the standard that He lays out for me? And once we've done that, now we can make a choice. And we can choose to practice the behavior that God asks us to do. So, I feel provoked. And I want to lash back in anger. I want to say that snarky, mean comment and just drive it home. Now, if I've done that a lot, hopefully prior to my conversion and not practicing it after, but if I've done that a lot in my life, the impulse to do that is going to be very strong. And it will take a lot of first identifying that I have this as a problem that I need to work on in my life, and then intentional practice of biting my tongue, swallowing my pride, giving a gracious answer. It may include intentional, deliberate things like I'm going to write out responses that are God-honoring, and I'm going to look at them and I'm going to put them on my mirror and I'm going to practice saying them, because every time we practice the response that God asks of us, we actually create new rules in the playbook. And it is a practice over time that gradually rewrites the rules in our playbook from ones that are from the flesh, we could say, from our selfish human nature, and starts to transition them over to the same rules that drove Jesus and that informed His behavior and His choices. So we become like Christ. We edit the playbook, but it's through practice.
In much the same way as we learn muscle memory, right? A pianist, for example, with that difficult piece of music, practicing hours and hours, but the muscle memory takes over and it's become a part of themselves that now they can play that piece without much thought. And really you're casting this incredibly beautiful vision towards the life of a believer who comes into conformity of Christ's playbook with the hope that we might sometime have muscle memory where that is automatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it works. It actually works. As an example, I used to early in my practice get frustrated when people didn't seem to appreciate how much I was doing for them. Especially if they, you work so hard for someone and you do all of this stuff and then you get a complaint or you hear just criticism and you're like, seriously? Like, you don't know how much I was on the phone trying to set that up for you, or, I worked late and I followed, I checked in from home, and all you can do is complain about it. And in our flesh, it feels like unfair. And our playbook says, how dare they? Don't they know what I gave up? And the answer is no, they don't. They're responding from their playbook out of their hurt and fear and mistrust, and they don't feel good, and they just want to feel better. And they don't know. They don't know what we've given or how it appears to us. And so getting to the point where I could see that side of it, that, they don't see all the pieces that I see. And I don't see all the pieces that they see. I'm not walking in their shoes. They're probably hurting. They're probably scared. And being able to remind myself of that when you feel unfairly attacked or criticized, it taught me a lot about Jesus and God, who experienced the exact same thing. And understanding that, so getting to the point where I could say, okay, let me examine my playbook. I'm feeling frustrated. Why is that? Well, it's because people aren't responding the way my playbook says they should. In my playbook, if I serve you, you should be grateful, right? We're taught that as small children. You should say thank you. You should appreciate, write grandma a note. And if people don't respond that way, we get upset, we get offended. And so being able to examine myself and say, ooh, this is what's going on. I have this expectation. And then going, wait a minute, God has that same experience. How does my response compare to his? And overwhelmingly, when I read Scripture, what I see is that God is far more patient. He is far more kind and gracious and forgiving and tolerant of our taking him for granted and all of those other things. And then I can say, okay, you know what? He's God. He asks me to be like him. But if he who is God can do this, if he can put up with human pettiness and, selfishness and just missing the point or not seeing or just running off our own way, even though someone's trying to help us, then I can practice that too. And as you do, it gets easier. And it gets easier. So the more you practice it, that starts to become your new instinct. So another story here. In the last couple of months, I got what I think is to me has been the greatest compliment from a patient I've ever had. So when people leave the office, they get these customer surveys, that's sent to them as a text, and they, fill out, what they rate their experience, right? And one patient said, thanks to Dr. Martinez, I didn't feel judged for my poor health. And I thought, wow, God, look how far you've brought me. Keeping in mind what Christ has suffered for us, not just on the cross, but just putting up with our, the people who wouldn't listen to him, the people who said, you're asking too much. The people who said, who are you to tell us, how we should follow God? You're just Joseph's son. What do you know? So looking at his example and saying he asks us to practice being like him. And as you do that, it gets easier. So my first thought was, wow, I wasn't even aware of anything in particular in that patient interaction. And the other thing I thought of was, how like Christ? Because God doesn't say, clean yourself up of all your messes before you come to me. He says, come as you are, sick, wounded, weary, messed up sinner that you are, and let me help you become spiritually healthy. And that was a joy to see that as a comment from one of my patients.
And what a beautiful thing. And perhaps it was becoming muscle memory.
Yes.
Right? That was your playbook to engage with her on a non-judgmental basis. Mm-hmm. I think you've so well articulated what a playbook is, how it operates, what it operates on, how it's formed, and then how our playbook can be changed into Christ's and what the conversion looks like and muscle memory and all of those types of things. You tipped your hat to something I would like to go into, and that is understanding another person's playbook, understanding them on the basis that they are running plays. You tipped your hat in that in the sense of a person not being thankful. And while our playbook immediately judges that at some character level, I'm guessing that you see more hues than most on that particular topic because you've thought deeply about other people's playbooks. What can you teach us, tell us about what it looks like to be thoughtful and to learn about other people and their playbooks, and what difference has it made?
I have found that learning about people's experiences is in a lot of ways more helpful than trying to ask them what they think. So when you ask someone what they think, you may get sort of a more abstract, logical, or apparently rational argument for something.
Which you would immediately engage with at that same rational level.
Correct. And so now it becomes my logic is superior to yours and this point and that point, and it becomes a debate. The problem with that is that most of the time, we are not making decisions purely on the rational level. Often what we do is we take the things out of our playbook, which are heavily influenced by emotional content, and then we look for logic and reasoning in the external world to justify what we feel. So focusing on the logical external arguments does not help you understand why that person feels or thinks what they do, especially if they seem to have a very strong emotional reaction to something or a very strong feeling about something being right or wrong. To understand the feeling, you have to understand their experiences, because what we feel emotionally comes out of what we have lived through in the past, and either how it has affected us personally emotionally or the emotions of other people that we've been exposed to. So an example of this would be emotional propaganda. So if you go back and you look at some of the things that were, public service announcements or statements, here in the U.S. or in different countries in the world that were published during war, they present the enemy in a certain caricature, and often with very strong emotional content, things that are intended to provoke an emotion. So I don't know specifically that this one exists, but you'll understand the idea if you've ever looked at these in a history book or something. Here's Hitler eating babies, right? Like, that is repulsive. It is an image that brings up a lot of emotional revulsion, and it links in our mind that this person and this evil repulsion are the same. So without experiencing someone of, for instance, a different ethnic group, if that type of emotional content is all that I'm exposed to, and I have no actual real life interactions with that person or people from that group, then I will develop a strong emotional reaction, whether that is justified or not. So this is the basis of biases and stereotypes. Once we start to interact with people from the group, it doesn't take very long before those stereotypes start to be challenged. We start to realize not everybody fits the caricature. Not everybody behaves the way this particular teaching I had from childhood, or these comments that I was exposed to in the past, or this commentator that I'm listening to says. And we have two choices when that happens. One is we either, again, justify our playbook, so we assume the emotions must be correct and we double down, or we start to say, maybe my playbook could be wrong here, and we start to look more objectively at the situation before us. So in this case, you might, for instance, have a rule in your playbook that people of a certain group or type are a certain way. And examining first your own experiences and saying, okay, is that true or not, is very helpful. But also listening to their experiences. So maybe they have a certain stance on or a position, and finding out, why do they feel that way? How do they see the issue? What experiences have they had? And when you understand, like, oh, this person grew up in this area of the country where this or that was a problem, and they had this experience in childhood where they were homeless, and that's why they see this particular social program in a positive or negative light. It makes a lot more sense, and you start to understand why someone has the particular perspective and an emotional reaction or expectations that they do.
And how illogical to you they might seem.
Until you know what they've experienced.
So I've got another story, okay? And then you unpack it with what's really going on here. I had a student, he had failed my class the year before, and he needed my class to pass, not only pass, but graduate, okay? And I made it my kind of year project. Like, I am going to get this young man through my class and graduate, and this will be great. Surely he wants that. Keyna, it came down to the final exam, and you had to attend the final exam to pass the class. And I got him to the place where all you needed to do is show up for the final exam, and this is a slam dunk. And guess who didn't show for the final exam? Mm-hmm. And here was my logic. My logic is, you surely want to graduate because graduation means a certain lifestyle and certain opportunities. And I came to find out later that nobody in his family has graduated. That was a huge leap for him. If I could go back, I would have probably done more work in my year if I could have reversed some of those experiences and helped him understand and maybe some misnomers of what a graduation looks like than getting the grade to pass. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would say even, a lot of this doesn't come down to, you used an interesting term. You said reverse the experiences. And that's not really the goal. The goal is to understand the experiences so you can understand what matters to that person and how they perceive it. So what we don't know, and there's a couple of different ways this could have played out in his life. He could have had family saying, oh, you're going to be the big man who graduates. You're going to be too good for the rest of us, And if the example is no one else has had to graduate to survive in a lifestyle that, while hard, is what they know and therefore they're used to it. And I'm not saying they're happy in that situation, but there are trade-offs. You move up the social ladder or the socioeconomic ladder, and there's different pressures and challenges. And a lot of times the struggles that we know and are familiar to us, we at least know how to manage. Whereas if you move into a different level where you have different struggles and challenges, how do you learn to manage those things? So we don't know, was that young man experiencing pressure from his family that, hey, none of the rest of us need a graduation to survive, so why are you putting all this effort in? Another one is people can be insecure themselves, and I have heard of instances where family members are pressuring a student not to graduate because they say, hey, you're going to be too big for your britches, you're going to get proud and arrogant, you think you're going to be better than the rest of us, and they will drag each other down. And I've heard and seen of instances where that happens. So was he experiencing that kind of pressure? There can be social pressures where if you do well in school, then you're something's wrong with you, or you're, too much of a nerd, or that book learning is just a waste of time. So we don't know, without knowing his experiences and what voices were speaking into him, we don't know where the pressure's coming from.
But these are all intuitions.
Yes, and so we can make assumptions based on what makes sense to us. So your assumption was he's going to want to graduate because that's the key to the better life, right?
That made logical sense to me.
But we don't know what his experiences were. And so the starting point is simply to understand there could be, for some people, experiences especially for some minorities in our country, there's a feeling that it doesn't matter how hard I work because the system is against me, or the world is against me, or it's unfair, the deck is stacked against me. So I could work as hard as possible and everything will be taken away. And that really kills initiative and drive, because if you feel like your efforts won't be rewarded, it's really hard to persevere and keep trying. So when we find that we don't understand someone, the first thing is simply to acknowledge, I don't think I understand this person, or maybe I should verify what I'm assuming that they want or perceive or need. And then it's just simply hearing the story. Where are they coming from? What have their experiences been? And getting that information out is far more helpful in understanding why that person is motivated to act or respond in a certain way than asking for a debate set of points to argue over, which misses understanding or hearing the heart of the person.
I really appreciate that, and you unpacking that particular example, because I think you're absolutely right. And that would have been very helpful for me 20 years ago. And here again, I'm going to bring today's episode to a close, as we've discussed how to rewrite playbooks, as well as learning how to listen to the playbooks of others by way of their experience. When we return, we're going to find out that there's some surprising places that playbooks are at a premium. Please join us when we return.